Guys, welcome back. Another episode of Trail Culture. This week, I am really stoked to welcome a machine and a lovely human, Marincowitz. I hope I said that correctly. She's a friendly face and has recently been taking the 100-miler scene by storm, which is one of the reasons we have her here today, but not the only one. We want to hear all the stories. And she has come back to SA soil, has done UTCT 100K, has done a little bit of the 13 Peaks route, went back for Pass to Pass, which is actually her home trails originally, which is so interesting. And she's also been in Shanghai, which I figured out now in our previous chat. And she's come back. She's just come from a win at the George Mountain 100-miler, which is incredible. But there are lots of kind of stories and pieces for us to put together. But ultimately, she just loves running, which is great. So it's amazing to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks, Em. It's really a great pleasure to be here. Like my partner said, he thinks there's just one thing that I can do more than running, and that's talking. So, I'm looking forward to talk about one of the things that I feel most passionate about, which is running.
It's awesome. That's why we want to hear all the stories. We really do. And just to start off, Marie, we always start kind of with the human, because that is ultimately the person who is present when all of these stories unfold. So tell us a little bit about you, where it started for you as a runner and just like a human being. How do you find yourself in this trail space?
I think for me, running has been a part of my life, like almost forever. Like I started running when I was 16. My dad was a runner. He used to do ultra marathons, normal marathons, like road running. And I think I grew up in a family that was always moving.
Yes.
Not necessarily professional people or in that space, but it's something I was exposed to from a young age. And I just always wanted to do the same. So it was not like I did sports in school as much as just running on my own and setting little sort of targets for myself, like to go further and further until I could do 21K when I was 17.
Wow.
I ran the Safari half marathon in Wellington where I was at school. And from there, I just always, enjoyed joining running groups or people who ran. And but like I said, never in a professional capacity or
it wasn't a professional sport yet at that stage.
And I wasn't competitive at all, so
I mean, you've traveled around a lot. We mentioned even in the intro that Shanghai was on the cards, and that you've worked a lot. So I think, something you said to me earlier was that you've been running for 36 years now.
30 years.
30 years, 30 years. So running has always been the constant.
Yes.
Throughout the moves and the changes.
Yes, for sure. So when I lived in India, I was doing a lot of running because there wasn't really much else to do. But it was literally like running the 700 meters around my apartment compound.
Oh, wow.
Because there was nowhere else that I as a woman could run safely in India, like where we lived. So that was like something that I then started doing, but I even trained for road marathons, like in this like little loop.
Wow. So you were ahead of the curve of COVID where people were running circles around their house.
Exactly. And if I think back of it now, I don't think how I can even run around my neighborhood like that. You know,
it's like too boring.
I don't know how I did it or what motivated me, but it gave me a sense of for me at that stage, it was what I needed to do in the mornings. And then from India, I was in China for 5 years, and that was where I actually did a lot of started to be introduced to the trail running scene. So there I've started joining groups and I did some trail runs. But then obviously coming back to South Africa, it was like amazing for me to actually be part of the trail running scene here that in the meantime has actually grown.
And developed as you've been away.
Yes.
And Maria, just a quick side road. What do you do? So this is the funny thing. People come onto the podcast and we all go, they're a professional athlete. Most of them aren't. It's like professional in the sense of they run full time and are being paid to run full time. That is slowly making its way into the South African trail scene, but isn't here yet. So what do you do for a job outside of the miles that you run?
Yeah, so I started off in the graphic design industry and worked in advertising. And then eventually I got myself into the educational world. So I studied further and did like a master's in education. And I then started teaching visual arts and design in the IB schools, international schools. So, and then I started getting involved also in the moderation of the IB school, like visual art portfolios and studies. So more like in sort of like going into the academic world in a way.
Yes.
But then also still doing my own art and, like on the side. I got back to that a little bit last year when I was living in Pretoria and I spent more time like working on my own stuff. And then also doing some creative direction online for a company. So it's like a bit of like loose little jobs everywhere. But like my intention is to start art classes here also where I live now.
Okay, so you're a creative. You're in this like art world, but the teaching is what did the teaching as a creative is what took you from place to place.
Yes, that is basically, and that was also like, it wasn't a natural or like, it wasn't my passion necessarily to be in the classroom as much as, you know, I loved the subject that I was teaching, but like it gave me an opportunity to travel to very interesting places and to although I didn't have so much time to run. And like now I'm in a position where I don't have all those like financial perks of working as an expat, but I have more time to run. So now I just have to find the funds to be able to do all the races that I want to do.
And I mean, so interesting. You mentioned how you've lived in interesting places. Like these are not your classic, like India and then China. I'm like, cool, very, very cool. One from a food side of things. I love food. That's a whole separate chat we don't have to have now. But I mean, the trail kind of scene and culture. I know you mentioned India, maybe not so much there, but in Shanghai or China at least, I think I saw on Instagram you did a race there. I always think of steps when I think of that part of the world. What is the trail culture like in China?
Yeah, that was actually quite interesting. I mean, when you're doing races in China, I wasn't like most of the races I did, you know, I didn't really know many people doing it. For example, at the aid stations, you know, most of the time there was like nothing that you really wanted to eat because it was all like Chinese noodles with lots of garlic and stuff in it that I cannot tolerate.
Mid-race.
Yeah, and it was the kind of food that they would eat like that was normal to them, like was not like what I could tolerate. So and you couldn't speak to anybody or tell them what you needed, because they couldn't speak English most of the time, the volunteers. People were extremely friendly. And, you know, it was like I was so frustrated sometimes because I would want to speak to some people on the trail, some runners, and they just, you know, my Chinese was way too bad to communicate, and they didn't have much English either. So it was like, that was different because it was quite a isolated journey, you know? But at the same time, like absolutely great. Like the races there, the trails are extreme.
Wow.
Like you get everything from very sort of, I would say, paved and trails with lots of steps and things. But then some sections of it would be seriously almost dangerous, where you're thinking how, has there no like much more wild than anything I've seen in South Africa, for example.
Yes. How can this pass the safety test?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that. But then also, like I think it's also changing a lot more people. So you would have 2,000-3,000 people running a race, and that would feel different. It would be more congested. There was, it's if I think back of it, it's hard to think of all the things. There's a lot of but like a lot of steps. They love steps. They love to pave things. Like they pave more of the mountain trails, which is actually quite sad.
Yes. I think I remember chatting to somebody who did the Hong Kong 100. This is ages ago, and I remember the post-race recovery. She was like, her body, she felt like she ran the Comrades because it's so much paving and the hammering of the steps on top of the fact that it's not a soft trail, it's a paved surface.
Yes. There's definitely a lot of that, and it gets mixed into some of the ultras. But some of the races I've done was like totally in the mountains.
Wow,
80
wild.
kilometers of mudslides seriously dangerous trails.
Yes.
And heavy rain and stuff like that. So I've had sort of very extreme experiences as well.
Yes.
And then I've had the more like paved steps type of
There's
trails.
A natural, not a natural, it's that's the trail because it's paved and that's kind of the option.
And like, for example, the Great Wall Marathon, I did that.
Wow, that's on my bucket list. That's so cool.
So that has like 5,000 steps.
Yeah.
And it was quite like also a different type of race where you have all these steps and things, and you have to actually train for that.
Yeah.
But there was also like no hills in the town where I lived. So like there was actually this woman who recommended that I must do steps in our apartment building, which was like 27 floors. So I would like do like a few sets of those, just going up and down the stairs every time when I came back from my run. And that kind of prepared me for it, I think.
Amazing. That specificity. Yeah, I've heard of like on different podcasts and things, athletes who say live in New York City and don't have access to any sort of trail. They can only just run around Central Park, but then they go up and down fire escape to prep for these races.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm like, that is, and then you get to run the trails that you actually love for like the 10 or 15 or 20 hours when you get to the race, but all of your training is in this like concrete jungle. I can't even imagine. I mean, we're spoiled for choice with what's outside the doors.
I think that's why now being back here, I cannot like appreciate it more, like to have trails like the Helderberg Reserve in my backyard. Like for me, this is like for more than 10 years, I lived in concrete jungles where there was just like no space to run. I like, except for going to a race, like maybe 2 times a year, where you would be a little bit in the mountains, or like shorter weekend trips and things like that.
That is crazy. I'm like, and that you still love running, and that's been the constant throughout everything is incredible. And so now you've been overseas and now you've come back here, and I know you mentioned you guys were briefly in Pretoria, and then the move to the Cape. When did that happen?
Well, that happened like in the beginning of this year. Like we made a decision that was also like a year of kind of being in limbo, not knowing where we're going, because it was dependent on work opportunities and things like that. And then in the end, we decided to settle in Somerset West.
Okay.
I mean, I'm originally from, like, I spent most of my childhood in Wellington. I lived in Stellenbosch for a while. I lived in Cape Town. So, I mean, like, I'm very familiar with this area, actually. But I wasn't doing trail running at the time. So it's still new. The trails are all new to me. I've maybe cycled here, or I've been there in a different capacity. But like to be back here is actually feels like a kind of a homecoming and full circle of, coming back as a different person and, like not a different person. I'm still the same person, but like, just
you've grown and changed, and
yeah, like in how I think about things, and just like I've developed a lot from when I last stayed here.
Yeah.
And so for a year, I didn't really have a home, lived out of a suitcase for a year. It's been very challenging at times. And throughout that all, like you have to keep up with your running, but you're always in a different place. And but in other ways, it's nice because you never get bored of running the same.
You're seeing new
route.
Trails, yeah. And I think you mentioned in our chat before this, I mean, Wellington and pass to pass was something that you did, and running the trails where you grew up when trail running wasn't a sport yet, and now you're like, I'm a trail runner and I grew up here, and this has only developed since I've been away, and like that whole kind of dynamic, interesting.
Yes. For me, going back to run in Wellington was really special because the last time I lived here was when I was in high school, and we went on all these science camps, biology camps in the mountains where you had to take people like other students on these routes and like show them all the flowers and the things. And it was almost like when I was running on these trails, I recognized certain areas that I can remember, and even the smells and the feeling of that area was so familiar. But at the same time, I was there kind of so many years later doing something that didn't exist back in the day. So
that is so cool. I love that. And also that you could kind of take that in and have that experience even though you're racing, is incredible. And I know you use the words now full circle, and something that I did want to bring in was, while I was prepping for this, is that full circle and valuing movement. I think that comes from your family background as well. And you made a recent post about your dad and the trail running scene, and you also mentioned him earlier in the intro. But before we get into what you've done with races, how has your dad kind of been an influence for you now, and special that he gets to share some of these moments with you at races?
Yeah, I think, I grew up with my dad sort of being the one getting up early in the morning to go for his runs. He had to do it also like in the mornings before he goes to work. It was just something that he was always training for something, but he didn't always have that much time to train.
Yeah.
But I think I think if you grow up and you see somebody doing something, it means much more than somebody talking about something or saying, oh, it's a good thing to exercise or whatever. He just did it, It was just like, and I was always thinking, wow, like how does he do it to get up early in the morning when it's still dark and he goes out for the run? Because whenever I joined him, like later when I was in high school, I was like, oh, I don't want to get up and it's so much effort and whatever. And then one morning, I remember him saying to me, just kind of like casually, was like, oh yeah, it's hard to get up, right? Like in the morning. But when we get out there, you're always so happy that you've done it.
Wow.
And it was like something just like opened up, I was like, it was this realization of like, oh, it's like hard for him as well, like he's not doing it because it's easy for him to do that, like it is, he realizes that it is sort of like something you have to sacrifice, so sort of like you're sleeping in late, but you're gonna get a really nice experience out of it.
He's like, it's worth it.
Yeah. And I think it's such an insignificant thing, but it was like sort of a life-changing realization for me, in whenever I had to do something and I felt, okay, like this is hard, then I would think, but it is hard. Yes. And it's hard for everyone.
Wow, yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. Oh, what an amazing truth right there. I'm like, that's so cool. And I think that your kids will, or not just kids, but your kids will do as you do, not as you say. That's such an amazing example for me of like your dad passing on this like love and this culture and like the shared early mornings and miles and kilometers. I'm sure that's come to mind during a race for you, even if you're racing alone.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
And him being able, I think your mom as well, like crewing for you at aid stations. I saw photos from UTCT and Mutt. How was that, having the family?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, in China, where I've raced before, I never had anybody crewing for me, and it wasn't really like the races lend themselves to that. And then at UTCT, where it's so easy actually to have crew because it's the aid stations are accessible to people. It was a new thing to me, and I was so excited just to have somebody being there that I know and who can help me. And then I had this idea, and I was so unsure about even, asking my parents or my dad to come along for the UTCT one, like the 100-miler. And all my friends were like, you should ask them. You should let him come, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, then I said maybe my dad could try, because they live in close to Still Bay in Jongensfontein. So that's quite a ways to go. And then we decided in the end for my dad to come, and he was helping. It was actually him and my friend Runel who crewed me.
Awesome.
So, but it was so great to be able to show him, like what the sport is really about, because it's hard to explain trail running 100-milers to someone who hasn't been there and seen like the whole culture or experienced the whole culture of it at the aid stations, meeting the other people and being part of the whole vibe. So for me, it was great to also show that to them, and then to my mom coming also for the George race.
Amazing. So, and this thing of there's this life cycle of them showing you and teaching you, and then now you're showing them, but it's based on something that they've taught you. I love that. I'm like, that's so special.
Yeah. Kind of like to be able to show them, almost like as a thank you, now I can make you proud. And you have exposed me to these things. You've taken me on these hikes as a family. We went hiking. I think they cultivated that love for nature and being in nature and adventure. Actually adventure, because that for me is the main draw.
I was going to say it's definitely pulling through. I feel like a lot of what you've done is not what I would call a safe race or the safe choice. It's like there's definitely an adventurous streak. But I mean, Marie, we've mentioned now that you've had UTCT 100K and 100-milers come up, George 100-miler, you're racing in Shanghai, and throughout all of this, running has been in your life. But how did the 100-miler thing come about? I think there's natural distance progressions that runners, they get into the sport and they want to test themselves, or they don't and they want to stay and do short things, and then I know people who have just been like, it's always been 100 miles for me, so chat to us a bit about how did you find yourself in these longer distance spaces?
I think I've always known that I like the longer distances, or that I that I dreamt about doing longer distances, mostly because of that factor of the unknown. I've always just liked to do something that I wasn't sure whether I could actually do it, where I just can see how far can I go, and what would it feel like at that distance. I was so curious about it. And it took me many years, from running my first 21 Ks at 17 to 33 years old before I did my first marathon, a full marathon.
Yes.
So I never was in a hurry to progress to the next distance. And once I felt comfortable with the marathon distance, then I was curious about going further. So then I started doing, I had one road race actually in India that was a 75K.
Wow.
But it was also this kind of strange small little event where you would start at 2 a.m. And I loved this idea of starting in the dark, running in the dark up this
adventure, nice.
in the mountains. And it was also in a very remote area and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, I want to do more of these things, but there was not many opportunities. So in China, when I found out about these things that people do, like 100-kilometer in the mountains races. I just wanted to do it. But I also realized I have to be prepared for it and I have to train for it. And I've never had a coach, so I've always trained just by really just guessing what one should do to prepare for something like that. So I often went into these things and I always knew I could finish, but I probably didn't do it to an optimal level because I was just not very well prepared. So there was always a stage in these races where I would totally go into a state of despair where I was like, I'm going to die. This is like, how do I get through this last 10Ks or whatever? But then as I came back to South Africa, I decided to do UTCT 100K. I've done a couple, maybe before that, about 400K races in China. So I wasn't unfamiliar with the distance, but I've always wanted to run the Table Mountain trails. And I was like, then in one go, I can see it all. So I want to do this distance. I wasn't well prepared as I should have been. So this was also and then that whole thing with the fire happened. And I was
it was that year.
Yeah. And I was probably the second last person that they let through at Hout Bay before they shuttled people from Hout Bay to, which means that I was on the mountain and I thought things were feeling a little eerie and weird because I didn't see anybody.
Yes.
And that was because I was at the back of the field at that stage.
Because the field had been cut off.
Yeah. And I had no idea that this was happening.
Oh, you didn't know?
I didn't know until I got to the other side and my crew told me that just know that you are now at the back. Everybody has, moved on.
Oh, gosh.
And I think that was also just that whole thing happening kind of was not, didn't help me.
A bit, For those who don't know, that year with UTCT, there was a fire, unfortunately, which if you think race directing and logistics is hard, try a random wildfire. And for safety reasons, they had to cut some of the field off. And then to allow them to finish the race, they shuttled them around to the next aid station. But then, there was a whole thing with tracking and timing. But I mean, now you're at the back of the field, which is not the back because I think you were the front runners. Yeah.
So that was I think that my motivation it wasn't about being at the back of the field. It was more just I'm now sort of here just out alone, there's not a whole field of runners behind you. It's a different feeling. And also I was just, I think I was just really tired at that stage. So so that was my 100K. And then after that, I was but I really want to, I still know that I want to do 100 miles one day.
Yeah.
And it was a one-day thing. I wasn't sure when I would be ready for it or whatever. But then I basically, everybody that I talked to or met seemed to have a coach, people who did these kind of distances. So I was basically then I was unsure whether someone like me, just a normal person running, should, if I could justify getting a coach myself, somebody to guide me. But then I decided, well, if I want to do 100 miles, I think I need a little bit of guidance in that. Yeah. So then I decided to sign up with a coach.
Amazing.
So I joined the Mindful Runners, Fred Richardson. And and I have to say, since I have started that journey with a coach, it has completely changed my experience of running.
Yeah.
I never knew that, you could have runs for such a long time and actually need or actually not know so many things,
I love that,
So since then I have felt more confident, when I wanted to do something like that, because you had somebody that actually knew what they were doing, that you could ask, hey, do you think I can do this? And, do you think I'm ready to do it at this stage? And what will be the, how are we going to do it? Which races?
What does the road look like to get from A to B, Yeah, it's not just the goal of doing the miler. It's how is this going to look for me? Because you've run for so long, right? It's do I need to change something? Do I continue on? That's so interesting.
Yeah. So that was like, that's how I got actually to the start of my first miler, which was then the end of last year.
And what made you choose UTCT as your first one? Because I mean, amazing course, don't get me wrong, but I feel like that is, and people can argue with me on this, that is probably the hardest miler that is on offer on the circuit right now. I feel like, well, George is also right up there, but there's definitely more first miler friendly choices that I feel like you could have made. Yeah.
Yes, I think I never, like, I mean, because I've done the 100K, I already knew the first 50 and the last 50 Ks of the route. So I think that is
Nice.
like an advantage. But also, my original plan was to do the Longmore 100 miles in December of that year. But then I got an opportunity to do the UTCD, and I was just like, you know, I was going to come down to my parents at that time from Gauteng to the Western Cape. So I was just like, you know, I love those trails. They are just they're just so beautiful. And I think another draw for me was the fact that I could have a crew, and there was the option to have people on the trail because it's not so remote, and you know, there are stations where people can access.
Yeah.
So then I made the choice to do UTCD, but I was never feeling like, you know, everybody says it's like one of the hardest ones. I was like, well, that's good, because then I've done the hardest one, you know, like if I can make it, then
the adventure in you is like, let's start with the hardest one.
Yeah, then I mean, from there it can only go better, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, your race there, your first miler, we're going to get to George just now, but was it what you expected? I mean, there's obviously this unknown point. You've done a couple of 100Ks, but past 100 kilometers, you haven't done it, you know. So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I would say I actually had a fantastic experience on my first miler, which I was very happy about, because I mean, I knew going into it, you know, that it could go any way. And also I got really sick 2 weeks before the race.
Okay.
I suspect that it was COVID. It was that time when everybody got back to getting some form of COVID again, and I just wouldn't get better. And when I was, you know, like, I was really seriously thinking I might not be able to start this race. So I think I was so happy just to be there and be like, okay, at least I'm here to give it a try, you know, like, even if I'm not feeling like optimal.
Yeah.
But then I was just like, I set out to do what you
envisioned. Yeah.
What I envisioned and what I wanted out of the race, and that was to finish. I wanted to finish it, and I wanted to have a good experience. And I made a conscious decision that I don't want to go back to that experience I had on the 100K of UTCT the previous year, where I went into a state of despair.
Yeah.
And feeling like, you know, I
don't like running. Am I going to survive?
Yeah. I was like, if I get to that point, you know, I'm going to get myself out of there. I was like, and also, you know, like, I talked to my coach about this, and he was saying, you know, you have to almost like expect that you might have, like, on a 100K, you might go through a dip like that, you know, a sort of this dark moment like once. But if you do a miler, you might go through a stage like that 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And you're going to get out of it. You know, you're going to go through it, and you're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And you're going to go through it again, and you're going to get out of it. And I was like going in with this mindset that this is going to be hard. And there are going to be those moments. But when I get to that, I have to remember that I have to get out of it.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, to continue.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that really worked. It worked to visualize the race and to visualize when I go into the space. And whenever it was hard, because I banged my knee really hard at some point against the rock. And then that was like really starting to hurt at some point. Like, and I was just, but then I was thinking, you know what, like actually there's so many parts of me that's aching right now. So
Yes.
that's actually a good thing, because now I'm not focusing on that one specific thing that's wrong, you know. It's almost like there's always a way to kind of to be able to talk yourself into a positive place.
Yeah. Wow.
But it is something that, you know, that I feel in this particular race, everything like played out as I wanted it to, because I also made that conscious decision. And when there was this expectation that I should go faster, you know, like to chase the third person and whatever, you know, like I just decided, no, I'm racing my race. I can't go and change my plan now and go faster than I planned, because I may just blow up and
then
destroy
you
my
lose
whole experience.
Yeah.
And for me, it was more important to have a good first miler experience. So
Yes. And then you did, which is awesome. So it's like you got out of it what you came in, you know, wanting. And then I feel like there's two types of people who finish a miler and say never again, and then people who finish a miler, say never again, and the next day wake up and sign up for the next miler. So I assume you were the latter, since you've just come out of the George Mountain 100 miler. But was that kind of, when you finished your race, did you already have your sights set, and did you feel like, I know that this is my distance and I want to try this again?